I'll speak about, I'm just going to go through a few different examples of the type of work that we're doing at the moment on the ground, and try and I suppose give a good indication of how it actually works in terms of not only day-to-day functioning, but how MSF as a whole kind of comes together. So as Pip mentioned, we have been working with this particular Ebola epidemic since earlier this year, in March, since the first few cases were identified in Guinea. And Ebola has been an epidemic which MSF has been engaged in, I suppose, in every Ebola epidemic since the 1970s, when it was first discovered. And through that, we have obviously built up a certain degree of expertise in how it needs to be treated, what needs to happen, and the different policies and procedures that need to be put in place, and what the real, I suppose, how you can actually address the epidemic at its core. What we have found is that with this particular epidemic, usually once you identify, once there is a cluster of Ebola cases, if you address that quickly enough, if you identify the cases, if you isolate specific cases, if you do the contact tracing with everybody that has come into contact with those cases, and follow those up for a 21-day period, you can very quickly try and curtail the epidemic from spreading. And that's what we've seen happen recently in Nigeria and also in Senegal, that have declared the Ebola outbreaks officially over. Within this particular outbreak in Guinea, which eventually spread towards Sierra Leone and Liberia, it quickly spiraled out of control. We had as what's coming out a lot now in the media is very critical of the WHO, but there was a slowness in being able to really respond and tackle this outbreak at its source, and really identify the speed at which this was growing on the ground. And it was back in the beginning of April when our international president, Joanne Liu, spoke out and really pushed at the UN and the WHO to say this thing is going to spiral out of control, and it's going to be unprecedented. And a lot of that, we've kind of been sounding the alarm bells for a long time, but it wasn't until August of this year that it was officially declared an emergency by the WHO. For us, for Médecins Sans Frontières, because we had a number of expertise, we saw a huge medical need, we obviously scaled up in our response, and in the absence of others really responding to this outbreak. And up until very recently, we have actually been treating nearly 3 out of every 4 cases. However, we know that one element of the treatment one element of treating Ebola is the Ebola treatment centres, and you've probably seen it on the TV a bit, people in these big yellow suits completely covered from head to toe to reduce the possible transmission of infection. What actually happens is that for each of our doctors working in an Ebola treatment centre, and particularly in the high risk zone where you'd have a number of patients who have been diagnosed positively with Ebola, and that we'd be treating their symptoms, is that you would have a buddy system. So they would work with another doctor, so that you're always working in pairs. Because the reality is that in a treatment centre in West Africa, where it's already extremely hot, once you're wearing one of these PPE suits, the temperature can rise to nearly 40 degrees. So it is extremely, it gets extremely hot, it's extremely draining, and as you know then, if people get tired, there is the potential to make mistakes as well. So there's different limitations. You can only spend up to 1 hour inside the treatment centre in one of these suits. You have to be in a buddy system with somebody else. You have to notify the other person if you're getting tired, and you have to leave immediately. And as one of the doctors said to me when he came back, you have all your equipment, so you can see that, and the rubber boots, and once he came out of the treatment centre, he literally took off the boots and was able to pour out all the sweat just after an hour. So it's a particularly high intense environment. It's also extremely difficult on our staff, and I say our staff, it's not just the international couple hundred people that fly in, it's the thousands of national staff we also have on the ground that are working within their own communities, who are working in these treatment centres as well. And they'll say the most difficult thing is, and you can see from this picture, is that when you have sick children, that you can't just hug them, you can't really touch them, you have to keep a safe distance. and you're essentially have to keep it goes against all human nature, essentially, that you have to keep this level of distance. You have to really try and get a lot of information out of the patient. So for every patient that is coming in that is positively treated, it's extremely critical that you find out what village they're from, how many members of the family they have, who have they been in contact with for the previous 21 days. And trying to get that level of information from people that are extremely ill is very difficult and challenging for our staff. But also, not only that, if you can imagine if there is a ward where there are 10 beds, and that out of the 10 people in that ward, only 4 people are going to survive, it's very difficult for the patients, because the patients are every day, they've just been separated from their families. They don't know if they're going to live or die, and every day they're seeing more and more people die in front of them, literally. So it's extremely traumatizing on numerous different fronts. We find that to even, as MSF, we have to kind of expand even our level of activities, that we were not only it wasn't just a case of just having these treatment centres. It's a case of having full teams going out into all of these villages. Once you hear a rumour, that somebody has, or once you hear that somebody has come from a village, or you hear a rumour that somebody has potentially got Ebola or has gotten sick in their home and died, that it's necessary to send out a team to identify the cases, to bring back suspected cases, to test, and also then to do the kind of epidemiological work of tracing everybody that those people have been in contact with as well. So there's a huge level of work that's involved, and as you can imagine now, when we've reached the scale of, I think, over 10,000 cases, we're seeing that if you're trying to do the sheer level of work that is involved in trying to do the contact tracing and the epidemiological work is immense. And we're hopeful that now that some commitments have been made, that this will start to become under control, but at the moment we're still very much far from it. There are some happy stories amongst all of the trauma, I think. We have actually in the last, this week or a couple of days ago, we got the announcement that we've had our 1,000 patient has been discharged from our Ebola treatment centre. So we've had over 1,000 survivors of the nearly 5,000 that we've treated in the centres. So obviously there's a high level of fatality rate, but there is also some hope that there are some survivors, and it is possible to survive this virus as well. So every time that happens, there's a huge celebration within the treatment centres. There's a huge level of camaraderie amongst the patients, even if they themselves have not been deemed clear of the virus. But people are, I suppose, celebrating the fact that some people have actually survived and are able to leave.